Hello and welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My name is Art, and today I'm thinking of just leaving it all behind. To not bury the lead, sorry for any clickbait title I might have come up with. I couldn't resist. But I wanted to talk about two books that I read recently that had to deal with the main character just leaving their entire life behind to pursue something different or just to find themselves. Now, you might know people or have heard of people that have just randomly decided one day to get up and leave. They might leave their family behind. They might have left their work behind. They just walk in and say, I quit. I'm done. And to be honest, there are days where I feel like doing that. And I'm sure you have those days as well. And this is part of what the joy of literature is for me, because I can experience those moments without any real world repercussions. The two books I want to look at today, one main character is a woman and the other main character is a man. And not only were their lives very different, but the results of them leaving their lives were very different. And people's opinions about why they left and all that were very different as well. So I want to talk about the book, The Ladder of Years, and compare it to the book, The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. First of all, let's look at The Ladder of Years. It's by Ann Tyler. It was written back in the 1990s, I believe, and had some awards it was nominated for. And The Ladder of Years is a book about a mother and a wife. Her name is Delia Grinstead, and she just up and left her family one day. She had teenage children, a husband, and outwardly, it looked like it was, that classic happy family. Her husband was a doctor and successful at what he did. But as you begin to read the novel and it unpacks her life, you realize that there are things that she is unhappy with, but maybe not able to express that well. She has expectations and thoughts and hopes and dreams that just haven't been realized. And as you read, you realize her husband is really dutiful but cold in his relationship with Delia. And so one day they're on the beach on a vacation, and she just decides, she just gets up and she leaves. She just starts walking. She gets a ride to town. She buys some clothes. She has some cash on her, so she finds a very cheap place to rent, and she ends up getting a job. And I should say that I will have some spoilers for these novels. I need to talk about the spoilers in order to talk about as we compare the two, but I'll try to warn you so you can skip ahead of those. And anyway, back to the story. As the story progresses, it's really just following Delia in her day-to-day life. She's going to work. She got a job as a secretary at a law office, and she spends her evenings in her little apartment reading. And she seems to be finding great pleasure in that life. But every once in a while, she has a thought about her husband and kids that she left behind and had no communication with them. Finally, a police officer finds her and wants to make sure that she's okay. And she is. And then he gets frustrated with her because, her departure was very thoughtless. And I think he has a point to just get up and leave behind a husband. He wasn't unfaithful to her or anything. He didn't mistreat her or abuse her. He was just cold and emotionally distant. And I think many in her family took her for granted. And so she just decides, I've had enough, and she leaves. Now, interestingly, and here's a little bit of a spoiler, if you wanted to jump ahead just a minute or two, she ends up getting another job with a man who is a single dad. And so she begins to be like a live-in nanny. And I almost wondered if this wasn't going to go like a modern retelling of Jane Eyre. But this child that she comes to take care of loves her and expresses those emotions better. And more openly, I guess. And there are some romantic sparks happening between her and her employer. So I'm wondering, like, is she going to leave her husband and here? Because in all this, her family does find her, and all she gets is a letter from her husband that basically says, don't know why you left, but I'll just let you do what you need to do. And that was it. Like, he didn't even try to fight for her or come and find her. And so you could wonder, like, did her husband, is he respecting her decision, or does she want him to, would you just at least fight for me? Would you, show some kind of emotion toward him? I thought that was really interesting. Then also, when she gets this live-in nanny job, she's essentially back to doing a role as a mother, living or having a role as a mother. But in this, the only difference really is that she's being paid for it. And I think in some ways she begins to realize that what she did had value. I don't know if the book really expressed that as well, or that conclusion was one that I came to. One of the criticisms of this book that I've read in like reviews, because I haven't really been thinking about this. What would make a woman just get up and leave her children, her husband, and just go away? And the book tries to offer some solutions or some thoughts to that. And so some of the criticism or problems people had with this book is they thought that at times she acted very selfishly. This whole idea of just leaving your entire family behind with no warning, no preparation, even like teenage children. And my thoughts to that are, one, why is it considered abandonment of her family and children when she does it, but when a man might do it, that idea of leaving children behind isn't quite as much of an issue? And maybe that's just from my perspective. I believe a husband or a dad ought to have as much part of a child's life as the mom does. They are both of their children. And that's one of the issues I saw with their marriage, is that, he was just very not involved. And not to be cruel or anything, but he just, maybe that was just his personality. So I hope that makes sense. But maybe the bigger question I had is, maybe we're asking the wrong question or thinking about this the wrong way. And maybe we should ask instead, yes, she might have acted selfishly, but it's worth wondering and asking why and what drove her to do this. What was the situations that drove her to do this? Now, we all are responsible for our actions no matter what. And I certainly think that if a woman is in like an abusive marriage, or she's being cruelly mistreated or whatever, things like that, sometimes you just need to leave and you need to get out of there. I understand that, definitely. But that wasn't the situation here. And maybe the reason for her leaving was a little more subtle or not as outwardly known. What we saw, how her husband's family treated her, and really even her own children, came across as she was being treated, she was underappreciated. I felt like they were treating her just like an object. Then what's interesting, again, to go back to the earlier plot point, is that she ends up getting a job where she's basically a mom, but she's getting paid for it. Somebody is ascribing value to what she does. And maybe in the end, that's what she was just looking for, was that, is what I do matter? Does what I do matter? Does anyone appreciate what I'm doing? Yes, you might think that's selfish, but also I couldn't help but thinking, I don't blame her for that. It is hard, to go in and day out going unappreciated. And it's not that we do these jobs and these roles, only for the praise and appreciation, but if I can speak to the husbands or the men in my audience for a few minutes, make sure your wife, your partner, make sure they know they're appreciated. Make sure that you express gratitude, that you are involved in the family life as much as they are, because it's a team. It's two people. It's not, our wives, our spouses are not just, an unpaid servant. Okay. That's maybe something I feel a bit passionate about, but let me talk about the ending. So this is definitely spoilers, and you can again check the timestamps below to jump ahead. But there will be spoilers. So the ending, her daughter was getting married, and she was going to go to her daughter's wedding. At the very last minute, like an hour before the wedding, her daughter decides she doesn't want to get married, and her mom is the only one sticking up for her. She understands the trouble that would come from being in a loveless marriage, or being in a marriage that she didn't want to be in. I think she understood that, and so she's sticking up for her daughter. Finally, though her daughter had treated her in the past maybe not in the best way, at the end she's realizing, I'm her mother, and I'm going to help her speak and make her decision, and support her in her decision. And this is where, for me, the book does kind of fall apart a bit. Like I felt maybe the ending was a bit rushed. The daughter, she's doing this thing basically where she tells her fiance, the reason I don't want to marry you, and until you deal with it, we're not going to get married. And she doesn't really tell him what it is, and he has to figure it out on his own. And really, if they had just communicated, this could have been all avoided. So I'm not sure I liked the ending overall, the ending of the story, where Delia ends up just going back to her husband and resuming her position as his wife. And I'm wondering if anything has really changed. I think maybe she has changed in the sense that she is able to stick up for herself more and stick up for her family better, and to verbalize and express the things that she wants. And I think perhaps maybe, and I keep saying, all these maybes and perhapses, because that's where I'm not sure the ending was as clear, or maybe I missed something. But it's possible then that she found out that what she does have value, and she returns to her husband, who, like I said, she didn't really, there wasn't any abuse or anything like that going on. But what I found dissatisfying is I like it when the endings are explained a little better. Like, tell me the lesson I'm supposed to draw from this, and help me connect the dots. I felt like I needed a few things more there to connect the dots, and I just didn't get it. But this is a very thought-provoking book, and though at times Delia might have been acting selfishly, I couldn't help but sympathize with her and understand why, the motivation behind why she was acting that. I just wish I could have seen more of a change in a resolution at the end of the story. But that got me thinking about, leaving it all behind. And did she have valid reasons to just leave it all behind? And maybe that's one of the questions of the book that it presents is, that do we even need a valid reason to leave our life, to make a decision? She is a character, a person of agency, and she can make decisions that she wants to, even if it makes no sense to anybody else. Maybe she just felt like, I have this right to leave, to explore, to find myself, to grieve. I think it was her father who had died just recently, and she was very close to her father. And so some of the characters speculate, well, maybe she's just having a breakdown from her father leaving. So all that to say, I have no idea why she left. And if you've read the book, I'd love to know your thoughts on it. And let me know. Let me know what you think. And I would love to continue that discussion in the comments, whether or not you thought were her acts selfish? Was there something I was missing there? Especially from a woman's perspective, I would love to learn from you about that, and just maybe help me understand this book more. But in all that, there is something, I don't want to say captivating about just having the ability when things get too hard, too overwhelmed, you're just too stressed to say, I'm just going to leave it all. I'm just going. I don't even care. I'm just going to grab a couple $100 and hit the road. I had a story Ladder of Years, and I just suddenly thought about comparing it to like the Jack Reacher novels. What a completely different perspective there. If you've read Jack Reacher, it's like a thriller action mystery series, and he's this loner that just travels the roads, owns nothing except the clothes on his back and the money in his bank account, and picks up odd jobs here and there for a short time, and just goes around righting wrongs and protecting the innocent. Really a different perspective there on leaving it all behind. Sometimes men, we think differently, I think. It's safe to say. The next book I wanted to compare this to is a book called The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. And I heard about this book on the Reading Glasses podcast, which is a podcast I love to listen to. It's one of my favorite book-related podcasts. This book was written by Rachel Joyce and came out just a couple years ago, I think maybe about 10 years ago. And I listened to the audiobook, and it was narrated by Jim Broadbent, who is one of my favorite British actors. I was just thinking while I listened to it that this would make a great movie, and Jim could play Harold Fry, because I thought he did a great job in the narration. And then I just saw that sure enough, he was in the movie version of it, which looks like, did it just come out this year? Yeah, it just came out in 2024. How about that? And it stars Jim Broadbent and Penelope Wilton. So I actually might want to check that book out or check that movie out, because I really enjoyed this book, and partly because I think I understood the motivation better. But there are a lot of similarities in the story as well. Let's get into the book. Harold Fry and his wife are of an elderly age, and throughout the novel, you begin to get little hints of a backstory for them, that there was some kind of disagreement or tragedy that occurred with between them and with their son. That was a really interesting structure, how the author just skillfully laid little crumbs in scenes and thoughts and statements throughout the story that then at the end wove into the revelation of what happened at the end of the novel. So the story opens when Harold gets a letter from an old coworker that he worked with some years ago. You also begin to realize through the story as it's revealed that there was something that happened between them, not of a romantic nature, but there was something that he did where he's been carrying guilt over, and we don't really know what that is yet. And so he gets this letter from his friend. It says she's dying from cancer, and just wanted to keep him in the loop and say farewell. And so Harold goes to write a note, and he's not really quite sure what wants to say. So he goes to walk down to the post office to mail it, but then for some reason he just misses the post office, and he just kept walking. And before he knew it, he's walked pretty much all day, and he along the way he decides, I'm going to walk all the way to where his friend is at in a nursing home, in a hospice, is what we would call it. Unlike the other book, Harold does call his wife, he tries to explain to her what he's doing, and she doesn't really understand. And because their relationship is one that is already tense, she's basically just is like, okay, whatever, do what you're going to do. And through his journey, that really does become a bit like a pilgrimage. As he walks through town to town, heading, I think it's up north, he's going to the hospice. It's like 450 miles away, and he's going to walk. through the process, he will get lost, he gets turned around, all those things, and his wife is just like, what are you doing, you old idiot, and she's even thinking of trying to get him to stop by calling in, medical intervention, taking him to the, to the asylum or something to get his brain checked out, thinking maybe he's cracked. I love that along the way he meets different characters and eventually he begins to get this giant group walking with him. But his motivation is not all the, the fame and the newspaper articles and the news attention that he's getting on this journey as word gets out as to what he's doing. But he just keeps thinking, if I keep walking, she won't die. And one character tells him during a time he's about ready to give up is that, she acknowledges that this might not make sense, but maybe we need more of that in life, that we need just what we need is a little more faith to do things that don't make sense. That was a great quote, and that was an interesting thought. Another one that came was that he was talking about walking, and he said, somebody asked, I think it was in the context, somebody had asked, why is he walking and different things like that. But he said, I think we sit down too much. Why else do we have feet? And I love that idea that, we do, I think as a society, we do sit down and too much. And believe me, I am very guilty of that. I've got the paunch to prove it. And if anything else, this book encourages me to get out and walk more. But don't worry, sweetie, I'll come home, I promise. So a minor spoiler here about the ending. So the ending, he does eventually get there, and he has a very emotional reunion with Queenie, and it is really graphically written about what the cancer has done to her body. So if that's something you would not be prepared to read, this might not be the book for you. So by the end, you've come to learn what happened between him and his wife and their son. And it's tragic. And essentially, he didn't get a chance to say goodbye to his son. And I wonder if what motivated him to walk was this attempt to repair a past hurt that he caused and caused his wife. And really, in some ways, how he failed his son. And then you learn the backstory between them and Queenie and what it was that he did that he felt like he disappointed her or that he failed her, and he is trying to make it right. So in a sense, the story is a bit of a redemption story as well. His wife is finally realizing that she does indeed care for him and is missing him for the first time in who knows how long. And it has a sweeter, more resolved ending than the Ladder of Years had. So I liked that. I mean, you could say, was his actions selfish? And you do get some of that discussion in this book, but not as much as in the Ladder of Years. I think one of the reasons is that he kept calling his wife and communicating to her what he was doing and trying to explain why, even though in a very real sense, he left her to pursue this just random thought he had or this, this desire to go and do something. I think some of her frustration comes from seeing him do something so difficult and challenging for this lady that he used to work with. Why doesn't he act that same way towards me, towards his wife? So that's interesting. So at the end, I've been left thinking about these two books and what would motivate us to just leave everything behind. Is it a sign of maybe mental illness? Is it a sign of unresolved grief? And if we're thinking of acting on that, of just leaving our life behind with no warning, do we have the right to do it? Do we have the privilege, or is that kind of a privileged thing even? There are people here who can't just pack up and leave. When I read mysteries and they talk about, the wives who are abused by the husbands and, they become murder suspects, things like that. And they usually discuss the questions like, well, why didn't she leave if she was being abused? And we hear that in the news. We hear that in discussions about spousal abuse. And sometimes, they don't have the ability to just get up and leave. So, that was something I was thinking about, is that ability to even just get up and leave your life behind. Is that speaking from a privileged position? I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And if you've read this book, what do you think about it? I really enjoyed The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. A very moving, emotional, thought-provoking book. Now, these are not books I normally read, as just general fiction or literary fiction is not necessarily my favorite genre, which is weird because I read a lot of Victorian literature, and that's essentially what that is, I suppose. But what drew me to these books were that I found the two main characters in each book to be very interesting and very compelling to read. I wanted to know how their journey ended. I wanted to know why they chose to leave it all behind and what lessons they learned along the way. This examination of what would cause someone to just get up and leave, I thought was fascinating. And dare I say, just a little bit tempting. What keeps me from just walking away and leaving it all? Part of it is this understanding of I have responsibilities and duties as a husband, promises I've made to my wife that, I need to keep. And so to get up and walk and leave, whether it's because I feel underappreciated or I need to find myself or, I need to right some wrong I did years ago, does that actually help solve anything if in the end I am, breaking what I view as a very sacred commitment, to my wife, my partner, my friend, in all this? So to have something that would motivate me to just leave that all behind would have to be something so powerful and so, so strong that it would overcome this desire or this promise, these promises I've made to my wife and to my children. And where was I going with that? To my wife and to my children, that I for me, it would have to probably be a mental breakdown that would cause me just to leave everything behind and go. So not to worry. I'm not planning to pack up and just walk out. I can put you at ease there, but these are the things that these books got me thinking about. And I don't know if I have any answers to any of the questions I've posed here. So I would love to discuss this with you more and dig into these topics. Through this, I was thinking about Agatha Christie. She was someone who very famously just disappeared one time for, I think it was like 11 days. She just left, disappeared. And they found her, 10, 11 days later in a hotel under an assumed name. And as we realize now, there was a lot going on in her life at the time, including, I believe, her husband had an affair, and she left him. And I think it was she was hiding out in a hotel using her husband's mistress's name, if I remember my Agatha Christie history right, which is a gutsy move that I kind of liked. So maybe that's how Christie dealt with her grief. She just said, I have to leave. I have to disconnect for a few days. Unless you subscribe to the Doctor Who theory, which involved giant bees and some sort of mind wipe experiment. But anyway, I digress. Delia, in the latter of years, I believe, she was dealing with grief and not being able to process her emotions. And I think maybe that stepping away helped her deal with that. And then Harold, just a tragic ending of, in the story of him and his son. And that grief has impacted his relationship with his wife and with the people around him and even himself. And so he deals with that grief by walking, by just leaving his life to pursue, what he thinks might be resolution. And he's trying to deal with his grief. And I know people in real life who have just one day got up and left their spouse behind. And I don't know necessarily all the reasons why. It's not really my business anyway, nor would it be appropriate for me to share that on the YouTube channel. But this happens in real life. And, I'm very curious as to why and what would cause someone to leave it all behind. And if that were considered to be, and if that were a selfish act or not. I don't know. I'm at the point of the video where I ramble now. So those are two books I've read just recently. Have you read either one of them or some other book where somebody leaves it all behind to go on a journey? Is The Hobbit that kind of a book? That's an interesting thought. Now that I'm thinking about that, there are a lot of different ways that storyline is expressed in literature. So that's interesting. All right. Well, I have rambled enough on these issues. So not to worry, I'll be back again soon with another video, and I will be at home where I belong. and I am very grateful for that, to be honest. I'm very grateful that I am loved by my family, and I love them in return, though none of us are perfect, for sure. Anyway, all that aside, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts below. What you think about these storylines, if you've read the books, anything you want to chat about. Yeah, I'd be open to continuing on this discussion. So until next time, take care and happy reading.